Most people think in words, or perhaps a mixture of mostly words along with some vague pictures, but not Temple Grandin. Words are like a second language to her, and in her autobiography, she explains how this ability has been an asset to her career as she ponders how the autistic brain works, combining personal experience with scientific theories. Welcome back to my channel, Wormies. I'm Hannah and I have autism and ADHD. I make weekly videos rating the representation of neurodiversity in the media. So go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button to join the neurodiverse bookworm family so you don't miss out on the latest recommendation. Temple Grandin is perhaps one of the most well-known autistics and a pioneer both in autism and animal behavior studies. At over 75 years old, Temple has seen autism go from being diagnosed as retarded or brain damaged, which was her original diagnosis, to a diagnosis that almost everyone has heard of in some capacity. I quite enjoyed the book, Thinking in Pictures. Temple Grandin talks about inventing a squeeze machine patterned after a cattle squeeze chute that helped her calm herself by means of deep pressure therapy. And I use weighted blankets, but still, sometimes I wish that I had this squeeze machine, and I've imagined one patterned sort of after a blood pressure cuff for the whole body. And the squeeze machine is relaxing and enables us to access gentleness and emotions that are hard otherwise for us to access. It relieves our anxiety and a low-level pain that a lot of us have all throughout our bodies, whether it be caused by tension or some other nervous disturbance. And in my experience, these weighted blankets or a squeeze machine, I'd really like to try one someday, enable us to accept other touches and keeps our nervous system calm when we're craving a hug, but the touch of another human being is almost painful in a way. Temple also talks about difficulties adapting to new clothing, and I relate to that. I hate shopping for shoes or changing clothing with seasons. It takes several days sometimes to adapt to having to wear a new piece of clothing rather than wearing the same style over and over again. I also relate to having difficulties with depth and volume perception. And before reading this book, I'd never heard anyone else talking about these and didn't know that they were related to being on the spectrum. But the biggest thing she mentions is having such an intense brain and being so fueled by anxiety that, yes, you are successful, but the anxiety is at such a high level that it's tearing your body apart and causing you a host of stress-related health problems. She says, "In my younger years, anxiety fueled my fixations and acted as a motivator. I probably never would have started my business or developed my interest in animal welfare if I had not been driven by the heightened arousal of my nervous system. At some point, I realized that there were two ways to fight the nerves, either by fighting fire with fire or by retreating and becoming a housebound agoraphobic who was afraid to go to the shopping center. In my late 20s, these severe attacks became more and more frequent. The jet engine was blowing up, exploding instead of propelling me. My visual mind was going into overdrive since I was desperate to find a psychological explanation for the worsening attacks." She goes on to talk about her journey with taking anti-anxiety, antidepressant medications at low doses. And she says, Taking these drugs caused me to look at myself in a whole new light. I stopped writing in my diary, and I found that my business started going much better because I was no longer in a driven frenzy. I stopped creating an elaborate visual symbolic world because I no longer needed it to explain my constant anxiety. When I go back and read my diary, I miss the passion, but I never want to go back to those days. In my pre-drug days, anxiety drove my fixations. Interestingly, fixations I had before taking the medications have made a deep imprint on my emotions. Projects I created before taking these drugs still arouse more passion than those I started afterward. In a way, this has also been my experience taking ADHD stimulants. I was an anxious wreck before, and the silence in my brain from taking this was amazing, but I also feel that it has blunted in some ways my passions. However, I too wouldn't want to go from one hyperfixation high to the next where I wouldn't sleep from that, and I would be so intense in my mind, just tearing my body and mind apart from that intensity that I couldn't control, or having my anxiety pretty much make me non-functional because I couldn't do the most basic of activities without bursting into tears. Overall, I give Thinking in Pictures a 3.5, and on the authenticity scale, a 5. She combines her personal experiences with scientific theories and research she's done. She also goes into exquisite detail about religion and spirituality and the meaning of life, and how autism has colored these experiences for her. As for diversity, Thinking in Pictures is a 2. As an autobiography, it is only the perspectives and opinions of one autistic person, combined with a few quotes from some other autistic people she has met. But we say that we're very diverse, and if you've met one of us, you've only met one autistic person. And while there may be commonalities, there's just as much difference among us as there is amongst individuals in the neurotypical side. The book only rates a 3 on the accuracy scale, as it's nearly 30 years old and contains some outdated information, even though there was an updated afterword and chapter updates added in 2020. Some of the opinions Temple shares in this book are quite controversial today. She's very much pro the Lovas program, which was the forerunner to modern ABA therapy, which many autistics consider abusive. And she says, when an educational program is successful, the child will act less autistic. She frequently mentions that the child should not be allowed to retreat into a distant daydreaming world, but should be pulled out of it and forced to look at and interact with the teachers. Now, I don't know if she's talking about forcing them to make eye contact or something else. She also compares teaching or training an autistic person to the training of a parrot. Irene Pepperberg has slowly and laboriously taught an African gray parrot named Alex to use language beyond mere repetition by having him watch 2 people talking to each other. One person would hold up an object such as a cork and ask, "What is this?" If the second person gave the correct name for the cork, she would be praised by the first person and given the cork. However, if the second person gave the wrong name for the object, she was told no, very firmly. After Alex watched many of these conversations, he started to use words in appropriate ways. Each small step was mastered before he went on to the next step. For a reward, the parrot would be given the object. He had to learn that the correct word could get him things he wanted. People teaching language to severely autistic children use similar methods. The Law-Us language teaching method requires seeing the object, hearing the word, and pairing the word with both the object and the reward. After a child learns the objects, he is given pictures of objects. For some children severely afflicted with autism, relating to such pictures is difficult. This isn't the only comparison of autistic behavior and reaction experiences to animal behavior and experiences either, which some may find offensive, although Temple states that her experiences as an autistic are quite similar and do not offend her in the least to be compared to an animal. In fact, she believes it's what's made her so successful in her career as an animal behavior researcher and designer of slaughterhouse equipment. She's also not a doctor, and while she backs up some of her recommendations with quotes from scientific papers and medical professionals, some of the therapies or treatments she recommends could at worst be harmful or at best have no effective basis at all. Thinking in pictures gets a 4 from me for being thought-provoking. Temple recommends not getting stuck on any one method, but noting what works and keeping that while getting rid of anything else that doesn't work. She also emphasizes the necessity for consequences and not letting autistics get away with any kind of behavior, that teachers and parents need to recognize the difference between fear or sensory overload based meltdowns, which she calls tantrums, and those which are done to be genuinely manipulative. She says, the subject of consequences is controversial. Some people think that nothing aversive should ever be done. I was always testing the limits. I knew that a tantrum in school had a penalty of no TV for 1 day. Discipline between home and school was consistent. Mother and the teachers were a team. I would have been out of control if there had been no consequences for bad behavior. Even though I was raised in a strict household, my abilities in art were always encouraged and never taken away as a punishment. I want to emphasize that I am totally against the use of aversives such as electric shocks. The repeated use of many aversives is wrong and abusive. Temple credits her social skills development to growing up in the 50s and 60s, where it was standard to teach all children social skills, and normal family activities provided structured opportunities to learn social skills. Today, many children lack this structure. Video games and time on the computer are spent solo. Many of my favorite childhood activities required participation with another child. She also worries that today's neurotypical children are not getting these opportunities and are growing up with more social problems. Later on, they do not know how to behave at work. In the 90s, the Wall Street Journal started publishing more and more articles on how normal people should conduct themselves. The articles cover topics such as gossip, use of email, and behavior at office parties. In the 70s and 80s, these articles were rare, yet now there are 1 to 3 of them in most issues. In the 90s, MIT, the prestigious engineering school, started a course in social skills. Many engineering students have mild Asperger's. Social skills training is extremely important for people on the spectrum. I'm not suggesting turning Aspies into social beings. People with autism and Asperger's are seldom interested in socializing for the sake of socializing. However, they need to have good manners and not be viewed as total slobs who wear the same dirty shirts for a week. And I agree with her on this. We should not have to mask who we are, but we should be aware of social expectations and In order to do that, it needs to be explained to us in a concrete way because we're unlikely to pick up on it on our own. It's just as important for us to learn these social skills as it is if we were going to a foreign country and needed to research the customs there in order to not be offensive or to misunderstand someone by accident. For example, in Bulgaria, I believe, instead of nodding their head to mean yes, they shake their head and they nod their head to mean no. And this is so ingrained in their society, as it is for us to nod to say yes and shake for no, which could cause so many misunderstandings. Just like this, we autistics need to be at least aware of the different social rules and expectations, even if we don't always follow them as neurotypical people. Temple also brings up the chicken and egg situation of the refrigerator mother, which has been well debunked. She says, the old theory of autism, popular until the 1970s, placed blame on the refrigerator mother, whose supposed rejection of the child caused the autism. We now know that autism is caused by neurological abnormalities that shut the child off from normal touching and hugging. It is the baby's abnormal nervous system that rejects the mother and causes it to pull away when touched. There's the further possibility that secondary damage to the brain caused by a defective nervous system adds to the child's further retreat from normal, comforting touch. This theory is quite fascinating to me, and I would like to know which holds more weight. Already starting out with an abnormal sensory programming, or the fact that this abnormal sensory programming blocks us from experiencing that touch and comfort that we need for developing more normal senses and experiences, and what could be done to relieve some of this possible secondary damage. As for the information contained in this book, there may be some things that make life more accessible for some people, such as a troubleshooting guide when dealing with difficult behavioral issues, as well as guides for those working with autistics of varying ages and different therapies that parents or even autistics themselves could look into and try. Despite containing some outdated information and certainly controversial topics, Thinking in Pictures was a fascinating read. I would really like to meet Temple Grandin one day and talk with her because I think we would have a lot to relate on. If you've ever read any of her works or listened to any of her talks, what are your thoughts on Temple Grandin? Temple's story was also analyzed in British neurologist Oliver Sacks' book, An Anthropologist on Mars. Click here to watch my review of this book or to watch the latest review. Don't forget to like, comment what you would like to have me review next, and subscribe so you don't miss the latest recommendation. Happy reading!